There is a gentleness and a deep awareness of the fragility of nature that is common in makers. I've never met such a gentle soul and a gracious listener than Bob Kingsmill. Hours passed quickly visiting his studio at the beautiful home he shares with his wife and business support partner, Mary Ann. I'm Carrie McLeod. Welcome to The Makers.
Hi there. Nice to see you, kid. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's go. Well, this, of course, has been one massive error. You know, when you're a young person, you make decisions, and then unfortunately, you have to live with them. And sometimes, like with myself, I've lived with it for 57 years, working with clay and making stuff. And I could have gone other ways, but I learned in grade 8 that there were other boys in the class smarter and would go into law. There were other kids who were better at writing, could do this or that. So the main thrust in those early years was the idea, although unspoken, of having personal freedom. I did work in a bank for 3 months, but the only pleasure I got was punching in $1 million on Kenny Neiman's adding machine and then watch as he was out $999,000 at the end of the day. Now this would not have held up very well in banking. And I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, and I watched men out working for the city in midwinter in that cold weather. And I said, well, that's not a fit. I did work at the new sewage plant in Winnipeg. I must have been 18, and they gave me a jackhammer to knock these great phallic concrete posts up, and that only lasted a day. So through those live and learn things, I just wanted some kind of freedom without being pushed or expected to be somewhere at a certain time to do a certain thing that I didn't think was of any relevance. And serendipity raised her ugly head. I was in a boarding house. I was a cub reporter at the Winnipeg Tribune. And actually the boarding house was run by a girl who grew up in Vernon called Cole Matiski. She was a painter. Her husband was an environmental guy, and this is in the 1960s.
Okay.
4 little boys, I think. But in the next room, there was a woman who was a potter, and she had inverted day and night. She was a student of Zen Buddhism. She worked at a pottery in Winnipeg all night, yeah, and then slept through the day and read Zen Buddhist bulletins and stuff. He was in the studio of a man called Jack Suras. He had taken a degree in the States in painting, but set up a pottery studio at Valor Road and Portage Avenue in Winnipeg, right next, of course, to a Chinese restaurant. And Muriel worked in the basement.
Okay.
She had gone to a place called the Archie Bray Foundation in the 1950s and worked with Peter Volkas and Rudy Audio, 2 of the greatest names in American ceramics. I think she was a woman of intent. She was serious about Buddhism, and she was very particular when it came to making pots. And so I think because of the quality of the woman and her way of going, which was a fresh way for me to observe, it was really enticing. And it also gave the added element of personal freedom. Now, personal freedom doesn't mean that I didn't work, because I had, for some unexplained reason, a reasonably good work ethic. I don't know why.
Well.
Part of it has to do with surviving. But so I worked 7 days a week and every evening for many, many years. And even when I got the studio on Granville Island, which was 1979, Marianne and I were renovating a house, trying to raise a couple teenage kids. I was working the island, teaching at Cap College, working for the Emily Carr Outreach program. They had a program which was really, really smart. It was an outreach program. The attempt was to get artists out into smaller communities around the province. Really smart. And it was great for me. The teaching just allowed another skill to pop up. That is an ability just to blather somewhat endlessly and without purport or import. So Muriel turned me on to working with clay, and in 1967, Walter Dexter, another famous BC potter, his studio came up for sale in the Okanagan Mission. And so my first wife and I did what everyone did in 1967, which was getting into the Volkswagen van with a 1-year-old and 5 cats and headed west. And the time I've been making pots for our community and the country has been a very rich time. It was complicated in those early years with the valley filling up with draft dodgers. And it was a time of quite intense feelings, you know. The Vietnamese War was a very ugly thing. But the valley was filled with young women, young men, and sometimes their wives and girlfriends. But it was a really exciting time. It was beautiful. There were some good potters, good painters. Betty Fairley and Gwyneth Lloyd from the Royal Winnipeg Ballet had settled in Kelowna, so dance was there, and music. This was happening all over during those early years. People out in Tofino, and they were called hippies, and they were denigrated and all the rest, but they were actually just looking for a community. They were looking for independence. They were looking to get away from some of the horrors of a grasping society, and many of them did. It's one of the surprising things is how quickly time passes in this and everybody's life, you know. Goodness gracious. how did that happen? I'm 83, sweet Lord. A few minutes ago I was playing basketball at the University of Manitoba. I'm slowing down, of course, but I've been hustling for quite a while. Now that has a positive side in that I got a lot done and a lot made, but on the other side, I didn't give time to the family I should have. You know, there's that, I only see it now. I was sort of working so hard and so steadily that I kind of missed that. I could have done more there or balanced it out. But I didn't see any other way. I just had to hustle. I think it should be recognized that it really never is a one-man or one-woman show. I've been lucky because I get a certain amount of praise, but Marianne is running the house, taking care of the kids, feeding myself and herself. My responsibility is to try to make the money so we can eat. Was the theory, but I don't think that idea or that reality of having support should be neglected. You know, it's really important. There are also invisible hands at work. Sometimes I think they're just attitudes that others might be carrying, but sometimes it's just a kind word. Like, how in the world did I get that Granville Island studio? Indeed, I did. I did go to public meetings, and I just found the speech I gave at one of the public meetings. The federal government was going to put $20 million into Granville Island. It had been an industrial island all those years, really industrial, and they were trying to rehabilitate the downtown area. And this was thought to be a really good project by some, but by others it was thought to be a travesty. They were spending all those millions. And what was it going to do to the Downtown Business Association? What was it going to do to Gastown? So there were some pretty strong voices against it. And the idea was that it would, if they gave, and this is maybe an important local thing, if they gave men and women in the arts a bit of a break, those women and men would bring vitality to a space. I don't know if you've ever heard of that group called, a place called Local Losers.
Yes, I do. I know it well.
But if you know that, here was a kid who saw an opportunity to give help to other kids. And just a simple idea. Given a break, it could have been a long-lasting, healthy increment to the downtown area. And it, for whatever reason, he wasn't given that break. It takes a while for an idea to be accepted. Now, Granville Island, it was to be for local people, but it turned out, because it was a success, because if Local Losers was downtown and giving a certain vitality to that downtown and a social service in a way, and an expression for the arts, it turned into a tourist attraction. It was a belief in the thought that men and women in the arts really do contribute a lot to our society. And any kind of negative stereotypical thinking regarding it is simply nonsense. Think of the theater, think of the studios, the galleries. The idea at Granville Island was that we'll give you this studio, Bob, for $73 a month rent, and you can only sell your own stuff. You can't bring in stuff to sell, and you have to be accessible to the public, and you'll get a reasonable rent for that. I just really get go into a temporary mild rage when you mention subsidized. Everyone is subsidized. Everybody in this province is subsidized. We've got a medical system, a highway system, and all the rest. And they weren't subsidizing the artists. They were giving them a bit of a break. They weren't losing any money.
That's true.
The amount of money Granville Island puts into the federal coffers now is staggering. Everyone's paying 5% GST. They're paying 7% provincial tax. They're paying city taxes. They're paying insurance. The big lampreys in our society are the insurance people. And so I don't know. I did take a Canada Council grant.
Nice.
In 1968, I took $350 and bought a dough mixer.
That's cool. For
Okay.
clay?
Yeah, for clay.
For rehydrating.
Big ugly sucker. It ended up at the college in Campbell River in the end, but that's okay.
No, these grants are
But I haven't otherwise been subsidized. I had one friend who's now, of course, an emergency room doctor at St. Paul's Hospital. And she went to university and took medicine, is a doctor, but she missed out on the reproductive classes. So she has 4 kids and a husband, and is an emergency room doc. And she is just fabulous. I would send the kids postcards from a name that I made up, mostly Arturius. And she began sending postcards back. And my favorite was one she had of a profile of a man's head with all the different parts of the brain, the cerebellum, the this and that. And then she had an arrow, and the arrow went straight to one part in there and around the card. And she said, "Bob, this is the part you're missing." Last week we had a girl by whose last name was the same as mine. And she was wondering if we were related. It turns out we're not. She's related to a much more famous Kingsmill, who was the admiral for the Canadian Navy in 1914.
Oh, wow.
But she's a horsewoman. And her daughter had 17 or 15, had just won a prize in barrel racing.
Oh.
Okay? Like, I know very little about barrel bloody racing. Like, I know nothing about barrel racing. And we live a multitude of lives, and there's a multitude of people out there living all kinds of different lives, and most of them are really good. There is a toxic situation with drugs in our province and in our town, and that's a profound heartbreak. I think the kids are absolutely fabulous. You know, there's a lot of really smart, bright, beautiful kids around. They're often not given a break. And you're speaking about how they can settle down financially. It's not easy. And I don't know how, I guess, but we can, by example, you know, show them that it's possible to pull this off. But you have to be, you don't have to be sneaky. You just have to be grateful and ad-lib it and hustle with it. It's hard for kids with so much going on. I think it's hard for young people to find the discipline that might really tickle them. It seems we have a grandson who's living in Victoria with 3 or 4 musicians, and he's not a musician. He's got a job, but 4 of them share a house. It's partly out of necessity, but partly because they like one another, and they've left here. They've left the Okanagan, and they've set up a small community. Isolation in our society is I think rampant, And it's partly, I think, like, what do I know? It's partly all the internet stuff. But at the same time, on a Wednesday night, a friend who's a minister at a church in Burnaby, he has jazz nights, and they go out over the internet. And so he brings in musicians. In fact, I made him a boot. I made him a ceramic boot, and the boot is called the Kingsmill boot. And what it does, people put money into that. That money is then given to the First United Church at Hastings and Maine to buy socks for men and women on the streets.
That's nice.
So there's the line, and Dr. Brian Fraser is the friend. He's the one that had me do 12 murals out at the School of Theology at UBC, St. Andrew's Hall. The church community has sort of fallen apart somewhat, but there's still good people doing good work, like the Anglican Church here feeds people and tries to make community. I've just found a book of Eric Idle, you know, Monty Python, and he said in one page, he said, "I'm a lapsed anti-Catholic." Okay? Which I thought was really good, because many of us have these sort of anti-religious things, but you could become a lapsed anti-Anglican or a lapsed anti-this or that, and then start looking at things afresh.
In a different way, yeah.
In a different way, and saying, what are they doing for a community? What are they doing for young people? Well, what you're doing right now is important. Getting out and talking to unlikely characters, and seeing, celebrating perhaps them, but not them, but more the ideas behind what they're doing. You know, there's just so many ways to live a good life. You know, and this state of persistent comparison is also insidious and unnecessary. It's hard enough finding your own place without having to constantly compare yourself to others. And you don't have to do it. What you have to do, I think, is celebrate others and see what they're doing and saying, "You rotten person, you're so good."
It is true. Well, I'm like walking here and just being like, you make so much.
Yeah. I'm slowing down, of course, but I've been hustling.
Clay comes from the earth, and the way that Bob has learned to work with his medium of choice and allow the expressions come through show how one he is with nature. His years of showing his work and sharing his studio space with visitors of all ages warmly and authentically have left an impact on so many. His stories are a soft place to land in a world that often feels overwhelming. Bob is such a gentle soul, and I look forward to spending many more hours with him in his studio. Thank you for joining us for this segment of The Makers.